I had just moved to the city for a new job and needed a place to live. After a lot of searching, I found a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate named Mark. The rent was affordable, and Mark seemed like a decent guy. He was a software engineer, a few years older than me, and had been living in the apartment for over a year. He worked long hours, which meant I'd have plenty of privacy. Mark greeted me warmly and helped me settle in. We got along well, and for the first month, everything seemed perfect. The apartment was in a quiet neighborhood, and Mark was friendly and respectful. It seemed like I had made a great choice. After a month, I began to notice strange noises coming from Mark's room late at night. At first, I thought he was talking on the phone, but the whispers didn't sound like a conversation. They were too quiet and rhythmic, almost like chanting. It was unnerving, but I brushed it off as my imagination. One night, the whispers were louder than usual. I pressed my ear against the wall to try and hear better, but I still couldn't understand the words. The sound was eerie and made me feel uneasy. The next morning, I asked Mark about it. He laughed and said he must have been talking in his sleep. His explanation seemed reasonable, so I let it go. But the whispers continued, getting louder and more persistent each night. I started to feel anxious and had trouble sleeping. I didn't know what to do. Mark seemed so normal during the day, but at night, something felt very wrong. One weekend, Mark told me he was going on a business trip for a few days. I was relieved, hoping for some peace and quiet. On the second night of his absence, the whispers were louder than ever. They seemed to be coming from Mark's room. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I remembered seeing a spare key in the kitchen drawer. With some hesitation, I unlocked Mark's door and stepped inside. The room was dark, but moonlight from the window revealed strange symbols drawn on the walls in what looked like dried blood. Candles, some burned down to stubs, were placed in a circle on the floor. In the center of the circle lay an old, tattered book. My heart pounded as I picked up the book. It was filled with pages of strange writing and disturbing drawings. Mark had scribbled notes in the margins with phrases like "the ritual must be completed" and "the darkness is coming." I put the book down and backed out of the room, locking the door behind me. My mind raced with fear and questions. Who was Mark? What was he involved in? Mark returned from his trip a few days later. I tried to act normal, but my fear must have shown. He noticed my unease and asked if everything was all right. I mumbled a vague response, avoiding his gaze. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more menacing. They seemed to be all around me, echoing in my mind. Unable to sleep, I lay in bed, listening in terror. Around 3 a.m., I heard Mark's door creak open. Footsteps approached my room, stopping just outside my door. The doorknob turned slowly, and Mark stepped in. His eyes were wild, and he held the tattered book in his hand. "You shouldn't have gone into my room," he said, his voice low and filled with menace. "You've seen too much." I tried to reason with him, to apologize, but he cut me off. "It's too late," he whispered. "The ritual must be completed before I could react." He began chanting in the strange language from the book. Mark's chanting grew louder and more frantic. The room seemed to warp and twist around me. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. Mark's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed to the floor, convulsing violently. The shadows in the room converged around him, forming a dark, swirling mass. With every ounce of strength I had left, I forced myself to move. I stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind me. Grabbing my phone, I dialed 911 with shaking hands. When the police arrived, they found Mark unconscious on the floor of my room, surrounded by the remnants of the ritual. The symbols on his walls, the candles, and the book were all taken as evidence. Mark was taken to the hospital, where he remained in a coma. The authorities were baffled by the case. They couldn't make sense of the symbols or the book, and there was no logical explanation for what had happened. I moved out of the apartment immediately, too traumatized to stay another night. In the weeks that followed, I learned that Mark had no known family or close friends. He had always been a loner, keeping to himself. His colleagues described him as quiet and reserved, never giving any indication of the darkness within him. I tried to move on with my life, but the experience haunted me. I sought therapy to cope with the trauma. I often found myself looking over my shoulder, feeling as if I was being watched. Months later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was the tattered book from Mark's room. A note was attached: "You cannot escape the darkness, terrified." I burned the book, hoping to rid myself of its curse. But even now, I still hear the whispers in the dead of night, a chilling reminder of the darkness that once lurked in my apartment. The experience changed me forever. I became more cautious, more aware of the hidden dangers that can lie just beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary people. Mark's story serves as a grim reminder that sometimes the most terrifying horrors are not supernatural, but the result of human actions and the darkness within them. I still live in the city, but I've moved to a new apartment with no roommates. I've rebuilt my life, but the scars scars remain. The darkness I encountered in that apartment is a part of me now, a shadow that will never fully disappear. Sometimes, the true horror stories are not the ones that involve ghosts or monsters, but the ones that reveal the capacity for darkness in the human soul. Mark's descent into madness and the terror he unleashed have left an indelible mark on my life, a constant reminder of the thin veil that separates normalcy from chaos.